Thank you. All right. For tonight's class, we're delighted to introduce Will and Raj. I'll introduce Will Herman first. Will came out from Boston to join us, be part of this event tonight. He's worn many hats in the emerging company community: entrepreneur, angel investor, corporate director, startup mentor, and now co-author. Back in the day, for those who were in the venture capital class, I didn't realize this, you were at DEC, Digital Electronic Equipment Corporation, which does not get favorably compared to the Valley company, so it'd be fun to hear some of those stories. The background of a great Boston company back in the day. Will became a serial entrepreneur, having started and managed 5 venture-backed companies, yielded 2 initial public offerings and 2 corporate sales. His companies have created almost $4 billion in value for investors. As an angel investor, super prolific, has invested in over 85 startups, actively advises 10 of those companies. Will's currently a fund advisor at 2 venture capital firms, Bolt and One Way Ventures, also a mentor with Techstars and a frequent speaker at accelerators. Please help me welcome Will Herman. Rajat Bhargava is an entrepreneur, investor, and now co-author as well. An MIT graduate, has 2 decades of high-tech experience, is a 10-time entrepreneur. His company has had 6 exits, including 2 that have gone public and 4 trade sales. He is currently the chief executive officer and co-founder of JumpCloud, where Will is also on the board of directors. JumpCloud, I think most of you are aware of this, but maybe not everybody. It is a unicorn and really one of the most exciting companies in the front range today. Please help me welcome Will and Raj. Thanks for taking me.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, let's confirm that everybody online can see it too. Did we? Yep, we're good? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate being here. Excited to spend a few minutes with you talking about really how do you build a company, how do you build a startup, and really there's a core component that we wanted to go through and spend the bulk of the time, which is really how do you vet your idea to be a successful idea that could potentially pay off? So that's kind of going to be the core of what we're going to talk about. But we wanted to do a couple of things before that just to get everybody level set. So we'll do quick backgrounds, and then we'll jump into a couple of slides on really the problem that we were trying to solve with the book. So Will, do you want to? Sure. I know
we've had the intro. You've got the whole spiel. We wrote this book a couple of years ago. It actually took us a long time to write. We were just slow. Had other things going on. The book is not only the things that we've experienced starting companies, starting running companies, but what we've seen in advising hundreds of other companies. This is certainly not something where we've gone out and done some big scientific study, but it turns out that the kinds of things you run into in each company are pretty close. They're pretty much the same things, same problems that occur very frequently happen in the next company, the same turning points, the same opportunities, the same hiring, the same firing. It all pretty much starts to look the same. And we would be advising companies, and we'd say, well, why hasn't somebody written this stuff down? Because it does really repeat very, very often. And we looked around, we read a lot of books ourselves, and we found that nobody's written it down. So we went ahead and took 2 years to write it down. Lots of iterations.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to take this one off?
Sure.
Next one?
Sure. Can we actually collapse that?
Yeah, let's collapse that. Yeah.
Okay, so conventional startup wisdom, you've heard it all the time, you've read it 1,000 times. It's about speed, speed, and speed. right? Those are the three key criteria to it. And we strongly believe that there's a very high correlation between throughput and success. That is, getting from point A to, let's call it point M, in a good clip is really important. But getting quickly from point A to point B to point C to point D is not necessarily important. In fact, we don't think it's important at all. We think that, in fact, the more calculated you are as you move through those initial points when you start the company, the better off your company's going to be. In fact, the closer to a guarantee that you can get, as close to a guarantee as you can get in terms of building a successful enterprise. It's all of those little steps that you skip from point A to point B to point C to point D that actually create problems down the road that are almost impossible to fix. So again, if you think about getting from point A to point M is what's important and not optimizing each one of the steps, we believe you'll actually create a bigger, stronger, faster growing company. 9 out of 10 startups fail, so the idea is, how do you move the odds in your favor? How do you become the one that does succeed?
So I think that's sort of what the core of the book really talked about, was how to tilt the odds. And basically the 90% that fail, we actually don't believe that should be kind of how it goes. And if you take some of the things that we're talking about in the book, we think you can dramatically change kind of the process, the odds, how it all goes. And it's a very disciplined approach to how you can build a company, and it's very methodical. So that's sort of why we wanted to pull all of this together, was to make sure that everybody's odds could get tilted. And we really do believe that if you're starting a company and you have the right idea, you have the right team, you have all the things, ingredients, you can make it work. You just have to be super systematic about how you do that.
And rest assured, we're going to go through the steps. So, as we talked about, what most startups do is they run at a breakneck pace. A lot of accelerators promote the idea is taking the shortest steps to get to funding possible. And if you have funding as your top priority, well, maybe you're going to gloss over some of the important things, like, how do I optimize the team that I'm building to create the company that I want to create, right? Because if you're going to an incubator or an accelerator, there's generally a requirement that there's more than a team of one founder, that there's several founders. So well ahead of everything, they're saying, even before you've really formatted your idea in any way before you've gotten product market fit, you're going to be putting together a team of people to do something you don't even know what exactly that's going to be. Does that make any sense? It doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. But most companies do that because that's what the training is now. Getting there fast, doing it quickly, getting the product out the door before it's ready to go out the door. Those are all encouraged by the market today.
So we hit some of the things that are kind of wrong with that. I'd also say a lot of the steps in sort of what we call the vetting loop get missed. So there's a lot of things that people don't really ascribe a lot of importance to. So for instance, one of the ones that we'll talk about a great deal is business model. So a lot of times it's like, hey, is your product innovative? Is it differentiated? Is it unique? Is it really super compelling? That's great, but there's a whole nother aspect of it. How do you get people to consume it? What's the business model to get to market, to generate revenue from it, make it work economically? So I think what we basically believe is that there's so many steps here that get missed that cause the 90% of the companies to fail, that we can change that by making sure that you systematically go through all those steps, you understand them, you vet them, you make sure that they're correct, and then you can kind of move on and you can start to really build.
So why don't we just...
Yeah, we can skip that one too. Yeah.
So here are the steps of the model. Easier to see in how we put it, the vetting process. And it starts in the I don't know, like at 11 o'clock, at 11:30 there with your idea. And we actually don't put much credence into ideas. We think it's very difficult to come up with a unique idea. The odds that you have a unique idea are insanely low. So you need to go about creating, as Raj pointed out, a business model that's going to differentiate you and make you stronger, stand out from the crowd, and enable you to make money. That business model comes out of at the end process of this vetting loop. Now, it's important to note in the loop that it's a process and it is a loop. It doesn't mean you will go through the loop completely the first time. In fact, if you do, it's probably a red flag that you got that far and think you actually tick the boxes along the loop. Most people will get 2 or 3 steps in and realize, something's not working here. You know, I went out and I talked to a customer and they're not agreeing with my summary of what their problem is. And what they'll try to do, what many people try to do, the classic way is go find a different customer. Oh, I must have the wrong market, so I go find a different customer and I work that way instead of taking that as feedback and saying maybe my idea is wrong. Taking an exit, going back to the beginning and saying I'm going to rethink my idea now that I have more information.
I think the other couple of things I would add is it is truly systematic. You have to go through every step. Like whether you think you want to, or you think you can kind of skip a step, or maybe you don't need to go through a step. The truth is you're going to go through just about every step, whether you know it or not. And if you don't go through the step kind of intentionally, the chances that you could potentially fail go way up. So part of what we wanted to do was surface that these are the key things that you really do need to go through the process and be systematic about it. I think the other piece of that Will mentioned earlier is that people think they want to go through this really fast. There's always pressure. They want to get their product to market. They want to get their company started. They might want to incorporate. They want to hire their friends. They want to do all this stuff. And so you put a lot of pressure on yourself to move really, really quickly. And what happens is you skip steps. And as soon as you skip steps, that increases the chances that you're probably not going to make it, or that you're going to have to retrench, figure that out, and then go back forward. And that retrenchment, once you've gone far down the path, takes a lot longer than if you can try to go through that process initially. So I'd say one theme that you should all take away is, as Will said, there's so much focus on pace and moving as fast as you can, but in a lot of ways, what we're saying here is don't worry about the overall pace as much. Make sure you get this right, because if you get it right, then the pace increases afterwards, a great deal. But if you get it wrong and you increase the pace now, then you're just going to extend everything later on. So I'd say this whole process is one that if you're going to start up and you're going through it, you're building a company, you are going to go through every single step in some way. Know that, and I would say be intentional about going through it versus thinking that you can kind of shortcut it.
So I'm just going to chain on that a little bit. One of the things that makes this particularly difficult for people, especially introverts, is that it requires that you go out and you're not self-vetting, you are actually using potential customers, partners, board members, advisors, mentors as sounding boards for each one of these points. And so it means 2 things. It means 1, you have to be comfortable talking, and it's good to get that practice in anyway if you're going to be running a company. 2 is, your ego can be like a pincushion. You're going to get shot down a lot. And one thing we've found that's pretty consistent in people who execute this well is they have this psychological mantra that basically has them celebrate failures as they go through the process. You celebrate a failure because it's a problem you're finding now, not once you've spent $10 million and are in the market, right? You've hired a whole bunch of people and you realize you're wrong then. You want to realize ahead of time. So if you think about that, it might help you through all of those times when you feel beat up at the end of the day because nobody's told you a single positive thing about your idea.
So let's go ahead and start maybe with the first step, which is you have an idea. And I would say this is the one that is super fun to talk about because everybody thinks, oh, my idea is so special, I'm not gonna tell it to anybody, if I tell it to you, you gotta sign an NDA, like all this stuff that happens. And the truth is, there's not a lot of novel ideas, very, very few. And you should just know that. You should, and it's okay. I mean, you can build a very significant company, even if your idea isn't novel, if it's not the most innovative, it's totally fine. The other piece of it is, a kernel of an idea is a wonderful thing because when you build on it, you iterate on it, and you don't get attached to that kernel of an idea. You realize that it's gonna morph, it's gonna change. And if you can go into the process thinking that, oh, I have an area of interest, I have this idea, that's great, then you continue to innovate and iterate on it, that's gonna lead to a lot better outcome. So I'll give you the JumpCloud idea, an example for just a second, and then we can take any questions around it. If Will wants to add, he can. But basically, how JumpCloud started is basically I came up with this concept of a directory service that we saw in the market, and Microsoft actually owns this category. It's called directory service. They basically have 99.9% market share in it. So, when I learned about that, and I learned about kind of what was going on in the market, I had an idea to create a next generation directory. And obviously, when you have somebody with 99.9% market share and you're trying to innovate in that market, that's a pretty crazy idea. But it was an example of, we saw an opportunity to do something different, and we said, okay, if we build on this idea, maybe there's something here. Now, that's just, again, the kernel of the whole thing that we're going to talk about here today, and it's a very, very small piece of it. And when we started the company, and to where we are today, which is 8, 10 years later, that idea has morphed and changed dramatically, right? So it's not that you have to have everything figured out early on, or that the idea is so perfect. It's the fact that you have some insight into the market that you think is interesting, and you have a hypothesis to it that you can then iterate, morph, change, grow with, all along the way. And so I think that's a core part of, how we think about the concept of an idea. It's the germ of what could be, right? It's the genesis of what could be, not the end all be all. So the more flexible you can be about that concept and changing it, iterating on it, making it better is really powerful.
I'll just say, because Raj is having such a strong one, one of the key rules is don't fall in love with your own idea. It's just bad practice. Chances are you're going to change it. Actually, early on, chances are you're going to dump it. So, and then later get to one that you can actually work. The other thing about ideas, and certainly the execution of an idea, is that often we'll hear an idea and really it's a statement of a problem. And or it's a solution to a problem that it's not clear what the problem actually was. The solution to something that we're not actually positive is a real problem. So an idea and anything that you have a chance of moving forward on is actually the combination of a problem and a solution. That's a business idea, not just one or the other.
Maybe the outline of this one is ideas aren't really worth a lot, right? So if people walk away with that message that it's just a starting point, that's probably the best way to think about it. So maybe we'll stop for a second. Any questions on that? If there's questions online, we're happy to answer them. If any questions here, go ahead.
Easier question. So what if I have
You mind standing up and projecting, because it'll make it a lot easier for those online to hear.
But what if I have an idea and I've written a 100-page business plan and I'm so excited to spend the next 2 years executing on my business plan? What do you have to say to that often reality for many first-time entrepreneurs?
You want to take that?
No. We have a picture here. It is, you spent a lot of time. It brings up dozens more questions, right? How many customers, have you been involved in that? Potential customers have you involved in that? where is the data that shows there's actually a market here? Can you raise capital for that? Each one of those pieces has to be covered in depth. And actually, if you've gone through and you detailed each one of those pieces, each one of the steps that we propose here, or a facsimile thereof, you actually don't come to a point where you have an idea in a 100-page business plan. You have an idea that's morphed itself several times into a product or a service that's already being used by 1,000 people who now you want to scale, and you're looking for additional capital to do it. It's because by the very nature of you engaging customers early and you having a feedback loop with testing each one of these points means you're expanding your business based on it.
I think the other piece would be if you've got a 100-page business plan, you're pretty committed to that idea and that concept. How likely are you going to be to change and adjust, right? So I think we would definitely advocate don't write stuff down. That's super important, but you don't need 100 pages to write stuff down. Now, if the 100 pages was after you went through the whole vetting loop and it was basically you're documenting that process, great. That maybe makes a lot more sense, but your question was more about hey, I just, went to home and I basically over a month wrote 100 pages and, kind of here you go. That's going to be pretty tough. And you're going to be emotionally committed to that idea and not want to change it. And that's probably the biggest risk that I see with that. Go ahead.
I'm the CEO of a 7-year-old startup. I am not a textbook example of going fast to market. And we hit the market early with an extreme weather risk probability model based on climate change data. And we just produced our first business plan a year and a half. What is your impression of business plans? Do you think they're needed with a startup? Do you think they're narrative? Are you really interested?
Raj, could you guys summarize the question?
Yeah, so the question was, I'll take the last part of it. Are business plans helpful? Are they needed? Are they useful, right? I think that's sort of the core question. I would say absolutely document things, write them down. I think as opposed to not writing them down and just having them in your mind, that's not a great way to kind of move forward. You have to document things. I would view business plans much more as almost just a way that's a living, breathing document, right? It's where you're learning, it's where you're growing, it's where you're making changes and adjustments. It doesn't have to be this thing that you sit down one day and just write or over a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever, and then it doesn't change. It should be that document that you go back to constantly and you're updating it. It's sort of it is sort of the living, breathing document of the company. If that's the model of a business plan, great. Everybody should do that. But if it's this, thing that you write once, put on a shelf, it's not very useful. So I think from our perspective, and you see it here, being systematic about your approach to your business is super important. A business plan is a tool to go do that. It's very useful, but if you get stuck with that and it's sort of just, you do it once and then you don't really make it living and breathing, then I don't think it's all that.
It's a communication tool, it's a documentation tool, it's not an event or a product in and of itself. It's a piece of your business model.
I'd say throughout the book, you probably will see us talking about doing your homework, right? I mean, it really is, if you want to build a really successful company, you have to do your homework all the time, in everything. That doesn't mean it has to take a tremendous amount of time. It doesn't have to mean that, you're documenting tons and tons of stuff, but it does mean that you're asking the really tough, hard questions. You're analyzing those, figuring it out, and then, kind of moving forward.
And it is good to write it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question, and then we'll keep going, because I want to make sure we get through it.
This kind of follows up with that. I think most would agree that human nature is to take the path of least resistance. So you're spelling out a methodical plan of basically saying entrepreneurship can be taught as a process. But human nature is, especially if you're a founder, I know steps C, D, E, I'm going to skip those. You could sit up there, you know, as an advisor, a coach, a mentor, which a lot of us have been in this room, and just encourage people till you're blue in the face. You got to do these things. You got to follow these steps, and they won't do it. So what tips or techniques have you guys been successful in deploying to really inspire people to methodically go through those steps and not take those shortcuts, to document things, write their hypothesis, test it, and document the results, and then learn from that and keep going?
Tough one, inspiring. You know, for an entrepreneur, part of the core of inspiration is continual success, right? And it's always good to have a fairly tight feedback loop so you can experience that success as quickly as possible, or move around a bottleneck to try to make something that's not a success into a success. That's what implicitly this kind of thing does. Now, markets have changed too. Now it's very hard if you don't get to step number 4 here. It's often a complete dead end. So you can skip a lot of steps, but eventually, you know, we believe that any really scaling fast growth company is probably going to need capital these days. You know, you can bootstrap, it's tough. It's very tough because there's so much competition. There's really no barriers to entry in markets and almost any market anymore. So if you're going to get to the capital formation part of things, get past product market fit, well, there's good motivation to get down and stick to the knitting.
I'm a little more hard-edged about it. I'd say pay me now, pay me later. So, you know, you're going to pay up on that issue. You know, do you want to spend the time now, or do you want to spend, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10x time later and increase risk? So at some point you can't make somebody do it. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. But I think you want to use the carrot and the stick a little bit as an advisor to say, you know, here's the carrot, but here's the stick, right? Which, however you want to think about it, that's good for you, is great, right? Do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, where are we? So who are your customers? Who are your customers? Knowing who your customers are, this is so basic, right? Who are your customers? It seems like if you have an idea for a company, you know who your customers are. It's surprising how many people don't. In fact, in my very first company that I started, a company called Viewlogic, I really didn't. I thought everyone was my customer, and which is a classic problem. It turns out it's not an excuse, but it is a classic problem. It's like, who's not going to want this? Everybody would love this. And it's never true. There's no product where everyone is a customer. And so understanding your customer, building a persona that represents your customer that you can then use as a tool for going out and doing some pattern matching to find out who are likely adopters, going to talk to your customers to understand where their pain is, what type of pain are you trying to address, and how badly do they experience? Do they have alternatives to dealing with it? Because the biggest competition almost everybody has is status quo, right? No change is the biggest competition. And so do you have enough to pull them over the line? Is it enough of a pain reliever or a entertainment tool or a performance enhancer that will pull them over the line? And you only get that by talking to loads of customers. And it's shocking how you can be 2 or 3 customers, potential customers, into your discussion when you realize that you got it all wrong. And I'm telling you, I've started 5 companies, 2 of them were miserable failures, but even the 3 successful ones, we got it wrong. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. Unless you are the customer for your own product, unless you're trying to do something that you deeply know yourself, it's super hard to figure out what exactly is the motivator for your customer to buy, what is the pain point you're trying to solve, what is the enjoyment level you need to achieve for them to make a switch, for them to put money down, for them to throw away what they already have, because switching is always super hard. One other thing, it's, over time, I've learned that the best tool in this is once you get somebody going, you start to understand what they're doing, ask them a very specific question about, would you pay X dollars for this if it were available in 2 weeks? You know, pin them down. It's amazing the reaction you get to stuff like that. That really helps you define what a customer is and what the scope of their adoption can be.
So the one point I would add, the counterintuitive one on this one that I think is really sort of the insight that we would give everybody is, instead of looking for big markets, look for the smallest market you can find. Find the group of people that really want your product, and it could be just a few people, right? Make it really work with them, product, solution, service, whatever it is. Make sure that you have a community of people, as small as you can get, that absolutely love what you're doing, and then work outwards from there, right? Because there's probably a lot of people like those people that would want your solution as well. But when you start with big sort of gross level markets, you don't get to understanding the exact reasons why people would want your product. So a lot of times, that's where I think mistakes get made, is that you don't really narrow down into some people who absolutely, people, companies, whatever it is, that absolutely must have what you're about to sell or build. And if you can find that, then you have something to work with, versus thinking, oh, you know, everybody in this particular demographic is going to be a customer, but then you don't know that for sure, right? So I'd say that the counterintuitive point on that is really important.
Yeah, and it's the easy thing to do, right? To cave in, to make that broader, to try to find fewer people to talk with along the way. Oh, I already have 50 people who fit my model because I've made my model everybody, right? So it's keeping that defined, making sure you dig it out. I mean, in the end, we see the successful companies talking to hundreds of people to get, to really get a scope and be able to build a persona that maps this very tight, as Raj pointed out, this very tight description of who your target customer actually is.
Okay, maybe we'll take one question or two questions there. Go ahead. Is there anybody online? Okay, all right, cool.
Hi, so I'm a part of a small startup team here at CU, and we're in the idea generation process. So I know there's all kinds of like textbook examples of how to generate ideas, but I'm curious on how you guys generate your ideas for your companies.
Well, I think, so there's examples in the book, so you can definitely look at that. I mean, there's examples of just problems that you have personally, right? There's problems of people that you know, right? So you hear about their problems. And then I'd say the third way is just general research. So we know people like you just are researching different things and you're able to surface ideas. I think ideas, like we put a lot of emphasis on ideas culturally in startups, right? We think, oh, that's a brilliant idea, that was really great. But the truth is that ideas they're a dime a dozen. You're gonna find so many ideas. I mean, if you really truly sit down, you can come up with dozens and dozens of ideas. Now, a lot of them may not work out, but that's fine. It's the process of generating them really fast and figuring out whether they're interesting. So I've never thought that ideas are all that important, and I think we sort of ascribe not a lot of value to that, but they are the place where you have to start, right? So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but
I think that's exactly right. And by the way, just not to leave that hole there, is we believe that a solid execution on a mediocre idea will beat poor execution on a great idea any day of the week, any day. So we focus, and a lot of the book is focused on how to execute.
The truth is on that, if you have a mediocre idea, if you have a really great team and people are working on it, you change the idea. It doesn't stay the same. You iterate on it and it gets better, right? So that's why that sort of holds through.
The other thing I'll mention on it is because you're searching, as you search, look for similar problem spaces that seem to come up multiple times. It's often at the root, they're the same problem. and people have different ways of describing the problem based on how they encounter it. And that's a fairly cool way of solving something and actually building that persona into something bigger and more complex might be a buyer for your product.
Go ahead. We'll just take one more real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Walid. I'm from the engineering school. Just a quick question. The fitting process, is it for any kind of startup company? Or it's more focused toward startup companies that needs a short-term success? For example, the high-tech YouTube, Apple's, I kind of think or imagine them that they're applying the same ideas. Because, for example, Apple, he loved his idea, but the understanding I got from you and from the loop, that you shouldn't attach too much, feelings to your idea. So.
Yeah, I think the question was sort of centering around, does the vetting loop work for all different startups? So I think we probably didn't describe this at the beginning. So we do actually define startups as a very particular type of company, right? These are fast growing. They are, probably capitalized. There's going to be an exit in the future. They're going to be scaled, right? So it's not like I would say the local, deli restaurant. Like we weren't really focusing on that type of company with the vetting loop. Although many of the concepts there would probably apply there, but that's not the lens that we use. We absolutely used a lens of fast-growing, scaling organizations that really want to, build something pretty significant. And I think in that case, I don't think it really matters if it's a software company, a hardware company, a clean tech. I'm not sure that.
In the service organization.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going because I want to make sure we have enough time for all these things. So, yep, I'm up with, next one is value proposition. So basically, this is a really, really critical step in the vetting loop, and that is, what is the value to the customer that you are going to generate? And, we sort of gloss over this a lot, like, people are going to love our product or our service. They're going to get this out of it, that out of it. And I think in this step, we really want you to get very tight, very specific, and talk to a lot of customers or potential customers about what is truly the value that they're going to get. Are they going to save money? Is it going to make them feel better? Are they going to be healthier? Are they going to have increased safety? Like, those are some of the benefits that you could try and ascribe to your product or service, but it has to be incredibly discreet and specific. And so this is also an area where you see a lot of glossing over, right? There's a lot of products and services that are nice to have, not must haves. And your job generally as a company is, how do you, for your community of people, make it that it is a must-have type of solution, not a nice-to-have. If you're in a nice-to-have category, your value proposition isn't going to be strong enough, and there's too much risk that you're going to have on whether you can generate enough customers. But again, if you think back on what we talked about with the customer segment, it doesn't have to be a must-have for everybody. It has to be a must-have for your community, right? And if your community ultimately can be big enough, then you're fine. You can build a really great company. But you have to know exactly what that value proposition is for that particular set of customers. And some of the examples are like safety, saving money, efficiency. I don't know, there's probably others, but like those are really kind of the core things that I think you need to find there.
And everything will follow out of it, right? So the thing about the loop is everything you've done beforehand carries through to the next stages. And when you think about, we'll talk frequently here about a business model, because we think that too many startups focus on product. And products are good, and certain products can be so differentiated from the rest of the world that they're enough to hold the company. But it's rare, again, because you've got so many similar ideas, relatively similar execution. We believe it's the whole business model that does it. And that's everything from when the customer, how the customer finds out about your product or service, all the way to when it's sunsetted after they've used it for 30 years. That's the business model needs to cover that. And then value prop is a cornerstone of how you build that long-term relationship with the customer and how you build a company around delivering on the business model.
So now, if you've done these first 3 steps, you have an interesting idea for a small community of people, and you have a reason, very concrete reason of why they might be interested, right? So that then leads into, hey, is this gonna actually work? Then you gotta go test, and that's sort of product market fit. So unless there's a question on value prop, we'll move to product market fit. Go ahead.
Going to exercise moderator's prerogative for a second. I'd welcome if you could maybe take the thread from JumpCloud. You talked about the original idea of a directory that would compete with Microsoft. How did these aspects of talking to customers and thinking hard about value prop make you think differently about your type of directory service and move it from something that might have been a nice to have to a must have?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of stuff pretty quickly that I can kind of go through. Like one is you had a world that was virtually all Windows, right? So everybody was on Microsoft technology and it was all on-prem. So this is back in early 2000s. And then the world started to shift, right? We basically added all kinds of interesting new technology. The cloud kind of showed up, AWS. You had Google come out with their technology. You had Macs, Apple had their resurgence. And then you had mobile. So you started to have people being more mobile as well as mobile devices, which really is only about 10, 12 years old in real kind of scale. So once we saw all these changes, we said, okay, our customer is the non-Microsoft centric organization. So that's how we started the business, which was to say, Microsoft, if you're all Microsoft, you're all on-prem, you only care about Windows, fantastic, go use Microsoft. But we now believe that there's a trend of people shifting away from Microsoft technology. We think there's a lot of people with MacBooks. We think there's people with iPhones. We think there's a lot of people using Google Apps. We think there's a lot of usage of AWS. What are they doing with their solutions, right? How are they using a directory? How are they controlling access to everything? And the short answer was really poorly, right? It was very hard because Microsoft worked great with Microsoft technology, not so great with everybody else. So our opportunity was to say, what's that narrow segment? The narrow segment is non-Microsoft organizations, right, that were starting out that needed technology to go solve this problem, but they couldn't really effectively use Microsoft. So that's kind of how it evolved. And now, many years later, we know that the market is moving pretty quickly into using lots of different types of technology. So we've got a tailwind where basically people are shifting away from sort of Microsoft-centric, on-prem-centric solutions. So we're a little bit in the right place at the right time to pick up on that movement. Does that help?
Perfect, thank you.
All right, let's keep going. Product market fit, all this stuff.
So product market fit, this is different here because it's a gateway. If you can't prove product market fit at this point, it really is a rewind, at least 1, 2, or maybe all the way back in steps. Is everybody familiar with the term product market fit? It's for those of you who aren't, it is that you know that you have, there are many potential customers who are willing to buy the solution that you described. I mean, that's all it is that you know you can develop a product and you know it fits with a group of customers who are willing to pay for it. Not willing to just take it, willing to just pay for it. It's simple as that. And the faster you can get to the point of proving product market fit, the faster you can get to a real company, the faster you can get to funding. We're here to tell you that if you can get to just product market fit, I mean, we say you should finish the whole loop, but if you just get to product market fit, you will be able to raise money at a higher valuation and give up less of the company, period. That's all there is to it. It is absolutely a cornerstone. It's what VCs look for when they talk about raising early money. They mean pre-product market fit. When they talk about raising later money, it's post-product market fit. And it is exponential how it scales in terms of what you get back. That's the value of it, because they know that we talk about 10% of companies, only 10% of companies succeeding, that 90% of those will ultimately fail because they don't have the right product market fit. You talk to anybody who runs an accelerator or incubator, they'll tell you that their drop off is all because of product market fit. VCs will tell you the same thing. So that's the importance of it, that you do all of these things leading up to it, you gather the information, you go out and you talk to as many customers as you can. I mean, we're talking, the right numbers are probably 100 plus. It's not a small number, it's not 3 or 4 customers that have validated your idea. It's a lot of customers who then say, when you ask the question that I said before, would you buy this on May 12th if I delivered it in red? They say, where do I sign up? There you go. Now you've got product market fit, and now you've got a company. To come back to the question before about the amount of time things take, if you can get there quickly, you've accelerated the entire process. It's super, super important.
And there's a reason that this is a gate. This is necessary, but it isn't sufficient. You have to go through this gate. If you don't go through this gate, our argument is you don't have a company that's going to work. So this is one of the most important steps. Go ahead.
I just have this question. If there's a product that the market, a lot of consumers will need or like, however, for product development or market research, if you don't have enough money, is that okay to do grants, getting some kind of grants to ask the right question about the market surveys? So for that kind of result, that you get it, like you have some kind of engagement between the consumers, potential consumers and the company. And however, all the information will be available to the public. However, only you know how to develop and make it work potentially to develop your product. Do you think it's doable? Or what might be the potential problem or benefits for that?
But I think I heard almost 3 different aspects to that question. So, one is sort of, one of the parts you're saying is, do you have product market fit? And you think if you do, how do you generate money for it? Well, let's go back to, if you have product market fit, that is a fantastic place to be in, right? So check that off, that's really good. That then presents a whole bunch of different opportunities to you. And one of the opportunities could be to take a grant, right? Or there could be other ways to capitalize that. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that's sort of the second part of your question. The third part of the question, I think, sort of relates to, well, if you do take that path of a grant, everything's public, and then what's your competitive stance around that?
Yeah.
And
thank you.
I mean, I can't judge that. I mean, that's up to each individual, your kind of situation, how much that particular technology is unique. If that's a huge competitive advantage, then publishing that might be a pretty big detractor for you.
Okay.
In general, for a lot of the things that we do, which are software related, I'd say there's not a lot of competitive advantage in that kind of situation. So even if people know what you're doing, they can reverse it and create it. So for us, it's more about execution. We don't really care if people know how something was done. It's more about doing it and doing it well. So, but for different industries and different markets, like obviously, I think sort of in pharmaceuticals, people do go through the patent process and that is published, but you have protection around that. Whereas if you did a grant and it's just public domain, that's probably not a good use of kind of how to do it in the pharmaceutical industry, but I think it's case by case.
Thank you.
But I'll add to that, and something we say throughout the book is that don't let anything stand in your way. If you don't have the time, if you need to accelerate for some reason and it's absolutely critical to your business, taking money from someone else to do that, especially grant level money, and that's the only path. All money's green, just take it. Take it, worry about the problem later, kick that can down the road, get the data, prove your thesis, and then put it together because as we said, that execution is what's important in the end. So you have to get to the point of execution for it to count.
Can I just make a statement?
sometimes we came in very early to the market. Science proved the validity of what we were proposing. We had to test it for 5 years. Now the market is interested. But I agree with you, sometimes you just have to around running and make sure that product hits the market. But it's depending on how much research and development, we had a lot of, the market takes its time. And you need to know when to hit it, and you need to know which customers to talk to. And it took us a long time. And so I agree with what you're saying, but that's not a blueprint for every startup.
Sure. Okay, let's keep going. So anything else on product market fit? Otherwise, I'll move to team. Or go ahead.
No.
Okay, so next step is sort of building a team. So you've gotten through product market fit. Now you want to go to the next level. You've got to build a team. And this is one of the most important steps in the whole vetting loop. It is making sure that you have the right group of people around you to go build your company. And it is truly building the company, not just the product, because at this point, you've decided that you have product market fit, you have something that the market does want. So the question becomes, how do you build it? How do you market it? How do you sell it? How do you do all aspects of what you need to do in a company? And it's finding that holistic team to be able to go execute on that, that's really, really critical. And the team, as we talked about very early on, the team makes all the difference in the world. So you can take a mediocre idea, even though you have product market fit, it might not be a fantastic, concept, it might not be fully honed, but a great team will take that to the next level. They'll figure out the problems, they'll adjust it, they'll iterate on it, and they'll make that happen. So this is one of the absolutely, most important steps, and it's probably a lot of the reason that when you think about what VCs say or investors say, they really focus on the team as the reason that they invest. Well, they do that for a reason, because the greatest predictor of success is going to be whether that team is the best team possible for this particular idea.
So if you take that and reflect back on something you said at the beginning, which is building your team first before you do any of these steps, including getting your product market fit, you can see how often the team is not the right team to execute on the rest of the business plan. Right? It's because it's too early, you just don't know the match. You don't know the skill set that you need. You don't know the type of combination of personalities you need to hold a strong team together. Because it's not just a fit of knowledge that you have that builds a good team. It's a fit of personalities. It's the fit of introversion and extroversion and people who are willing to, work this amount of time and work this amount. It's lots of complex things. And to think that you know that off the bat it's very unusual to get it right the first time. That's why you always hear about teams turning over so often, is because they were selected too early.
Okay, let's keep going. Building a product.
So it's funny, what do most startups do right off the bat? First thing they do, build a team and build a product. First thing, where do we have them? We have them with these steps 5 and 6 along the way. It's again, what we're showing you is an order of things that we think maximize the chances for success and building a great company. So now you have a team, now you can actually build the product as opposed to trying to just hack at it at the beginning. And the product is, now you've talked to customers, you've got a value proposition, so you know what you're trying to deliver on. You've gone through the gate of product market fit, so you've talked to a bunch of people and you said, this is what we're going to solve this problem, this is how we're going to solve the problem, this is how we're going to package it, would you be interested in it? They say, yes, now it's time to build it. You've already spec'd your product out. You don't walk in, you're not just hacking everything together, you're idea-wise. You've got it all spec'd out for you. You know your sources and you know your targets. What a lot of people do now is sit down and try to deliver the product. We think at this point, you shouldn't even be delivering your MVP. So, everybody familiar with the concept of an MVP? It's something like, the early versions of a product that's mostly functional but really built on a house of cards kind of thing. That's what an MVP is. We don't even think you should go that far. We think that you should build a demo, something that you can go back to those customers with, present them and say, is this the thing that you thought you were going to buy? Is this how you like to see it? Because once they start seeing it, they're going to push back and they're going to say, oh, no, that's not exactly it, but if you could do this, but if it could run on Sunday nights, if it could be purple, it's all of a sudden you start to get this stuff up, and since you didn't go ahead and build the entire foundation of your ultimate product, one, you've done it much faster, got it in people's hands, showed them what you could do much faster, and two, you can now start building a foundation based on the foundation of the ultimate product, actually your MVP before your ultimate product, based on real feedback from customers because they've now seen a facsimile of what you can produce. So that's what we talk about in this stage about building a product. Plenty of time to build your MVP in real product. Questions on that? I'm sorry.
No, good. No questions there?
Good.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Next step is step 7, differentiation. So obviously an incredibly important step in the process. So you can have a great idea, you can have a team put together, you can have kind of vetted with customers, but why are they going to buy your product or service versus somebody else's? And ultimately what happens here in a lot of, at least I'll say tech-focused companies, is that we focus on product differentiation. So, we have more functionality, we have better functionality. We have some great widget that we built, or it's cheaper, or it's faster, or something like that. And those are fine, those are fantastic. You have to have those. I'd say you better have a lot of those in general, like you're gonna need quite a few differentiators. But I think that the thing that really gets missed in this step that we wanted to focus on a great deal was business model differentiation. So ultimately, in order to build a very significant company, you need two things to be different. You need a different product and you need a different business model. So I don't believe that you can build a massive business if it's just one of those things. It's just not significant enough. And I'd say in the long term, the differentiation that's going to actually really carry you to be a very outsized company is going to be the business model differentiation. So, and those are much harder to come by. It's a lot more significant in terms of level of effort, work, a lot more risk too, because you're usually trying to change the behavior of how somebody buys or how somebody consumes your product. But if you can come up with a more natural way that people can consume or buy your solution, then you're going to build a pretty significant business, right? So, I mean, we can go through tons of examples, right? It's a lot easier to pay for Netflix than it was to go to Blockbuster. Obviously, with streaming now, super easy, right? Like, you can go on and on and on with, people that had different business models and had differentiated product and were really, really successful. So we will underscore absolutely that, think of it in two ways, which is product differentiation or service differentiation, and then also making sure that you find business model differentiation. But with the business model differentiation, it has to be underpinned with a more natural or better way for that customer to consume whatever it is that you're selling. So that's sort of I think the really important insight on this particular topic. Any questions on?
I'd love for you to pull that thread forward with respect to JumpCloud. I think it's super interesting. So you talked originally about the idea that sounded like a product differentiation, a better type of directory. What's the business model differentiation that's worked for you guys?
Yeah, so I'd say the business model differentiation has been very, very significant for us. So at the time, the competitors or the other products that you could use were all basically incredibly expensive. They were sold through direct sales. You needed professional services, integration, consulting. You needed all kinds of time and effort to go make this work, and you needed a lot of money. So what we said is we're going to take the complete opposite approach. So we said you can download our product online, you can pay for only what you consume, you can pay by the month. And we made it really inexpensive, and the product was so good that you didn't need to go hire consultants, you didn't need to have other people help you do it, you could do it yourself. And so the business model differentiation was really pretty significant when we started. Now, the market has shifted and a lot of people have come towards the way we do it, but we have such a head start on the business model that it's pretty honed for us. So I think that's been one of the core differentiators for JumpCloud for sure, has been the business model, approach. And I think maintaining that differentiation gets harder and harder, but if you can generate enough of a lead or you become known for that particular differentiation on the business model side, you'll generally be okay. Go ahead.
You spoke earlier about shipping, not rushing to ship a new product because you want to get the feedback, or you don't think you're ready, waiting till you're ready. Were you at one point shipping before you felt you were ready? Because there's so much you gather from that feedback loop, even if it is pissed off customers. If your product is good, you will survive that feedback loop and you will iterate and you will improve. So I'm just curious about that comment because everything that I've always read is like, ship, if you're close to ready, ship and get it out there and learn.
Well, it's the challenge there is that what are you shipping? Are you shipping, or so have you developed first your final product? So if you're shipping it, you've probably thought you've developed your near final product that you're shipping out, right? You wouldn't ship out a facsimile, you wouldn't ship out an MVP, not for production. So the question is what happens later? And what we see all the time, and I think I can say we've both experienced in companies we've built, is that you collect so much debt in the product over time that eventually you stall. You find that you base the core of the product on incorrect assumptions, on poor code, on loads of stuff that shouldn't be in there. Let's just put it that way. And you're forced at that time to, generally speaking, if you can, toss it and restart, which is obviously hugely expensive. So if you can take a little more time up front, we'd argue that you get rid of that problem in the back end. Not saying anything's ever perfect, but man, we can't tell you how many times the foundation has to get thrown away, which is a mess. Then you have to hire more engineers than you think you're going to do. You're going to piss off even more customers that are in production at that point. And that's sort of the principle. Does that make sense?
And don't mistake the taking a little bit longer for not communicating, talking to customers, having them see it, working with them, right? So I don't think we're advocating, take longer, but don't, involve customers or people who would be consumers of it to give you feedback along the way. I think we're just saying take a little bit longer to get it more right, because it's probably gonna end up in the long run saving you a lot more time than kind of like the mantra of let's ship this quickly as we can and get it out there, and you're gonna have a lot of the problems that we'll talk about, and we think those come back to bite you pretty significantly later. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in regards to fundable companies that are both competitive and also enduring, I feel like I've kind of heard a dichotomy between this idea of being differentiated and being 10 times better than the competition. I think with JumpCloud, you're a perfect example of a company that isn't going after your competition. Microsoft has 90% of the market share right now, but you guys are doing category creation in order to be competing in an entirely different route. That's like your sustainable competitive advantage. So I was just curious, like, what your thoughts were for young companies that are trying to move fast that might only have like a 10x improvement, 10x advantage with regards to innovations or marketing or whatever KPIs you want to talk about.
Well, if you have 10x,
or any arbitrary.
Yeah. I mean, if you have 10, it's super hard to achieve 10x. I mean, I suppose if you're in, if you're, base science, you can get to 10x these days, but it's very difficult in anything else. There's just too many competitors out there. If you can get 2x, you're good. So, I mean, Again, it's about a combination of differentiation and execution, right? You can be without any particular lead in terms of the product on the dimensions of, quality, service, performance, whatever, but you continually deliver to what the customers want, right? You're in a short production cycle and you're super responsive and you have the best service in the business and you're the easiest to use. Well, that's enough because things are moving so fast to continually keep you over the competition. So it's not quite the Porterian approach to 10x differentiation anymore. It's really, can you take your whole business model and eke out a slight performance gain, hopefully make that bigger with momentum over time. That's a winning strategy. Okay, let's keep going. Sure. So your go-to-market plan, simply put, go-to-market is just how you attract customers, how you make them aware of your offering, and then how you sell your product to them. How do they take your product? How do they pay you? How is the transaction made with them? That's it. That's your go-to-market plan. It is part of what Raj was talking about in terms of your this is looking at your entire business and working through how it all works. Now, one of my more successful companies, a company called Viewlogic Systems, which was acquired a while back. When we started the company, we were in a fairly small industry, maybe total of $4 billion in revenue per year. We were a new entrant, and each of only three other companies in the business, each basically were over $1 billion in revenue and doing very nicely. So how did we enter? We actually didn't have time to get this is CAD products. We didn't have time to get a real product lead. But when we went out and we talked to customers and we understood what was going on, these products were selling for $50,000 a seat, very complex semiconductor CAD stuff. And we found that the sales cycles were these incredibly long, detailed, very hard to deal with sales cycles. And that if we could package a product for cheap enough that a manager, a development manager inside a company could pay for it with a credit card, they would just buy a seat of our software, and it was a land and expand strategy. And we only knew that because we went and we talked to all these customers, and they said, my frustration is, I can't actually buy this stuff. It has to go through approval levels. It is so much friction in the environment, and that's how we got in. We couldn't have the best technology available. We weren't even close. We had a satisfactory technology that was delivered in the exact way that the customers wanted. And that was where we relied on our go-to-market plan as the key differentiator for us. And again, along the entire business model, it doesn't have to be all of the things are better than your competition. It can be the thing that differentiates you is deep in how the customer gets the product, uses the product, understands it, gets service support, and so forth. And it was a huge success, and we ultimately became one of the big players in the market. But really, really key. So don't leave it behind. A lot of people think about it as at the end. Okay, I have the product now. Now let's figure out how I'm going to sell.
Any questions? Maybe we'll take one if there is one. Otherwise, I'll wrap up. I'm going to combine two of them. Okay, I'm going to combine basically how will you make money and how will you fund it. So obviously, ultimately you've got to generate some revenue, you've got to generate some income in order to sustain the business. And then, in the short term, for a lot of the companies that we've been a part of or the startup sort of approach, you're going to need to fund the company, probably not by revenue in the short term. But on the revenue side, I think it's really important to be crystal clear around how will you get revenue from the customer and really aligning that into a way that is natural for them to buy the product. So if you're trying to force a model on somebody that's not natural in the way that they buy it, you're gonna have a lot of friction. So you're trying to search for what is the right model, and whether that's they pay you one time, they pay you overtime, or if there's other ways that can happen, you're trying to figure that out. And I'd say one of the things that's been pretty incredible over the last, say 10 years has been how many different approaches have come out in terms of monetization and how to get revenue generated for different types of products. So being very creative there is super powerful. It can be a huge differentiator for you. And we're not talking about just the dollar amounts that you charge for your product. That's probably, in fact, maybe the least important part of it versus, kind of the approach and the model and, how does that translate for that customer? And then ultimately, as Will said, how does that work with their buying constituency? If it's an individual, that's easy. They might not have to decide with anybody else. If it's an organization, how does that work organizationally? Can you make that as easy for them to consume and buy as possible? So that's on the business model side, on the revenue side. And then I'd say the other piece of it is you're probably not going to generate a lot of revenue in the short term. It takes a little bit of time to get the company going, get products out there, and generate revenue. So for a lot of companies these days, an easier path is to raise money so that you can go and capitalize the business, to go execute on building the product, and then ultimately getting to a point where you can generate revenue. And these days, there's quite a few different ways to fund a company. So there's obviously accelerators, there's venture capitalists, there's grants. I'm sure I'm missing like 10 other different ways, but angels, Kickstarter, yeah, those kinds of opportunities. So ultimately, ultimately there's different ways to capitalize a company, and you're going to want to, again, align the capitalization with kind of the rest of the model. So you built kind of what you're trying to do with the company, your idea, your go-to-market, you have a good sense of what the big opportunity is, and then you want to capitalize it in a way that makes sense. So obviously, if you're going to take venture capital money, then you're going for a very significant outcome. So you're going to want to make sure that your market is big enough. You're going to want to make sure that you have the right team to handle that. If you're going for grants or something different where basically you can take a little bit of money and it's more forgiven, if you will, you may not be going for those big outcomes, and you can build a company a little bit differently. But aligning the capitalization with how you're going to build a company is super important. Again, if you do that wrong, you're probably going to create a lot of friction and potentially fail. And same thing with the business model on the revenue side. Again, aligning that to your product, your market, your target, all of that, and making sure that it all comes together.
Not a lot to add there. There's, and if you follow this model, you'll actually be raising money later in the process than what you read about now mostly. Because if you can get through, as I mentioned before, if you can get through product market fit, actually you can get fully around the whole model before you raise money, you are bringing to potential investors a fully baked company. As opposed, so they're not funding you to go figure out what to do, and therefore you get better valuations, you can raise more money, the skids are greased, things become much easier, and ultimately, as we talked about before, you move much faster. The whole thing from point A to M, as I pointed out, the throughput is much higher if you can do that.
You guys have successfully landed the plane right on time. I know that we'd like to do some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I might suggest, because I know some people have babysitters and appointments to go, is I want to make sure that we say thank you, and then would you be game for 10 minutes?
Absolutely.
And for those that want to stay. So first of all, dynamite discussion in terms of systematizing and putting together in a method, something that really distills your experiences and challenges some of the entrepreneurial methods that are out there. This was such a high value discussion. Please help me give a warm thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.